I'm pretty sure that you've never played a game like Bye Sweet Carole. That might seem like an obvious thing to say, since anyone looking at this game will immediately tell you that they've never played a game that looks like this. I don't mean just that though. I don't think you've played a game with this kind of beauty before, but I also don't think that you've played a game that has point and click puzzle gameplay that's as slow to love as this, and a game which succeeds in living up to half of its genre title with exceptional horror elements and incredible tension, while also having some of the most horrendous implementation of the survival side that I've ever seen. Bye Sweet Carole combines all of this into a package which is extremely rough around the edges. Bugs aren't uncommon, the gameplay can feel cumbersome initially, and the sound effects are a disaster, leading to a lot of underwhelming moments. But Bye Sweet Carole pushes past all of this to be an experience I ultimately enjoyed, as I came to realise while playing that there's nothing that feels like this for a reason. It's incredibly unique, and for some people it will take a while to learn to love this game, but if you can overcome any initial grievances, you might find yourself enjoying how slow the gameplay is and how engaging it eventually feels, how well the horror is implemented, and how stunningly gorgeous every moment of it is. Bye Sweet Carole is a difficult game to describe. It doesn't live up to being called a survival horror game, but it's definitely still a competent horror game. It's a 2D platformer, but the main character has to shift forms to even be able to jump, and grabbing onto ledges can initially be quite finicky. There's some stealth to it, and it's not terribly done as a mechanic on its own, but the enemy design really drags it down, leading the overall experience to not feel like stealth at all. What this game does have though is the spirit of a point and click adventure, along with janky elements of all those other genres. Most of the gameplay revolves around exploration of a set series of rooms in each chapter, looking around for objects that will in turn help you manipulate or obtain other things in order to solve the overarching objective of each chapter. Like fixing this grandfather clock, which involved a number of steps to get a working cog I could use to get the clock up and running again. It's pretty classic point and click stuff. You unlock another form and a companion for some levels, and all of these things interact with the level in different ways. I won't spoil any gameplay elements later on, but like I mentioned before, you have another form that does all the platforming, the bunny. You unlock this pretty much straight away, and I found myself sticking to this form for most of the game because it's much faster and much tighter to control. The rabbit feels a lot more fluid than controlling the main character Lana, but you're also required to switch between forms a lot, so she never feels forgotten, and there are things that she can only do anyway. Again, this is a strange mixture of many different genres, and it can definitely feel a bit grating at the start as you get invested into this new experience. You may feel differently, but there are definitely going to be a number of people who boot this up and don't like how it feels or how it plays, and from there it's pretty easy to drop. I definitely felt like it. The first couple chapters took some getting used to, especially because of my preconceived notion that this was a survival horror platformer. Just a disclaimer. You play as an orphan named Lana Benton, who attends Bunny Hall Academy, a girls' school in the early 1900s. It's there that she is forced to follow the path of every woman before her and learn about the ways that they can be a good wife to a man, an objectified servant and accessory. It was during this time that the suffragette movement was growing, and Lana often fights against her education and training in the hopes of having her own future. She gets bullied for her difference in demeanour and only really gets on with one person, her friend Carole. Carole is the woman who makes Lana aware that it's even possible to think about having a future aside from the one that society dictates for her, and they share a bond over a shared vision of being free in the future. It's not long until Carole mysteriously disappears, and we spend the game looking for her and unraveling the dark parallel world that Lana is then sucked in and out of, called the Kingdom of Carole, which is where the darkness breeds and the villains try to harm Lana. So that's the overview, and I have mixed feelings on how it plays out. The sections of the story that play out in the real world are overt and easy to follow along with. They more so focus on the roles and rights of women, the will and violence of men, and the society that they have created. You hear from older women who've long been trapped, and you hear from young women who are just starting their conscious lives of oppression. The men in this game are disgusting and emotionally manipulative, covertly treating these young girls like malleable husks. At no point does this game try to get its message across subtly. Every idea is spoon-fed through overt dialogue and actions. This is a very good way to cover the topic of women's oppression. It's loud and knows that a lot of people need to be spoon-fed this information themselves. It's very well done, and while not a complex tale covering the topic, it definitely is a worthwhile story in that regard. The game also covers topics like growing up and letting go, which is especially intertwined with the main villain. Again, that's a nice tale, although it doesn't cover as much interesting ground. Where the story loses me is with its fantasy aspect. I realise I do sometimes find it difficult to follow along with very abstract storylines, but the story of the Kingdom of Carole and the mystery behind the villains felt very convoluted to me. Your mileage will vary, and you very well might play the game and understand everything that's going on, but I felt that some concepts were not explained well at all, and I found myself confused multiple times throughout it. I don't even have a proper timeline of of what happened and why things happened in my head. A lot of confusing things got wrapped up at the end, but I still feel that afterwards I didn't have a great picture of what this adventure was, and the ways that the events of this other world tie back to the real world and its themes. A lot of the character work goes into Lana, and while none of the other characters are really on screen for too long, it feels like they've all developed by the end of the game. The journey of Carole herself is great, and given the size of the team and the length of the game, characters like Miss Hinneman, Vicky and Josephine, Miss Fisherin and Lord DeWitt all have a beginning and an end. Oftentimes it will feel like a quick snap to the conclusive idea of their character's arc, but each conclusion is satisfying enough to have them in the game, and each character feels substantial without having too much focus on them. Most of them are really nice additions to the story and are vassals through which to explore the game's themes. All except for your lovable companion Bye. This guy is the most confusing character in the game. He's both emotionally absent and emotionally charged, a backbone for Lana and still completely useless to her. There's one particular scene with him which is very jarring towards the end of the game, where it feels like the game doesn't know what his personality really is or his role to Lana. He appears and disappears, saving her life sometimes, then other times stops helping her for no apparent reason. It feels like he's missing in some situations where he should be there, but then he's really useful other times. He feels very out of place, and not the bundle of love bright spot for Lana that he should be, like how the trope is normally done. It also doesn't help that he's probably got the only voice in the game that I don't think is extremely impressive, because he sounds like me trying to do a Kermit impression after 12 vodkas and 30 pounds of shots deals.
We remember you differently, actually. Did you get a perm?
It's disappointing because all the other characters are quite strong, and especially all the voice work in the game is especially strong. They all have great range and you can feel their emotion and humanism. With Bye, you just wonder who he is, what he's doing there, why he acts like this, and why he sounds like that. Where the game really pulls ahead is with its one-of-a-kind art and really quite gripping horror. It's probably at least one of these things that got you interested in this game in the first place, and you'll be happy to know that generally the game delivers on both of these. As for the art, what can you really say? It's hard to put an achievement like this into words. Every scene drips with beauty. Every dark corner feels sinister, every frame on animation is beautifully crafted. There are so many backdrops that make you just want to look instead of play. The cutscenes are so good that by the end of the game you just accept that this is how the game looks and forget how much of a feat it is. Seriously, all of these cutscenes are incredible, and some of them even do reach the height of old animated films. You just have to play it to see them for yourselves, because this is one of those things where you know the art is good. It already most likely interests you, so I don't really need to recommend that part of the game. What I can recommend for the most part though is the horror. So in the game, not every level has enemies in. There are some which are strictly puzzle levels, and the only challenge is figuring these puzzles out. Other levels will include a roaming enemy for a part of a stage who will search for you while you solve the puzzles and attack you. We'll talk about the actual mechanics of this in a bit, but I want to focus on purely the horror and tension aspects a little. On the topic of how this game looks, I do feel like I need to start off with the fact that these characters are designed really well. The main villain has iconic character design, and plenty of the other enemies are memorable and creepy enough looking too. It's one cool thing to have horror characters in this art style, but it's another thing to have them look this good, and I always look forward to seeing what the next enemy looked like. So the enemies are scary enough every time you see them, the environments are dark and dreary, there's tension in not knowing what room the enemy's in. When they do pop up, it's often something like a jump scare, because most of the time there isn't really warning, and when you do start getting chased, the music that plays is frantic and is great for keeping your heart rate high. All of this combines into a horror experience that oftentimes has you quite tense and in anticipation of when you'll next be chased. I haven't played a lot of horror games, but this game had me jumping more than any other ones I've played. There were honestly quite a few moments where I got startled by an enemy appearing and the loud snap of the music. This game will definitely get a few jumps out of you, but aside from that core horror experience, everything else that surrounds it is honestly really half-baked. Yes, the pure horror of these encounters is there and it's thrilling, but the way they're implemented can honestly be quite unenjoyable. We'll start with the fact that it is really easy to escape the enemies. Your bunny form is faster than anything that chases you, which never encourages any sort of tactical stealth. If you do manage to get hit, the enemy will rarely do any good damage at all, making it not matter at all if you do take a hit, so then you can just leave and go regenerate that health you lost automatically. It's also really easy to juke them out. You can normally just jump through the enemy model and you'll take no damage at all. There are hiding spots in every room, but you don't have to use them out of necessity for survival. I only ever had to use them to make the enemy go away because they were standing in an area that I had to be in to solve a puzzle. These enemies aren't dangerous, and the only reason you'd ever want to hide from them is to make sure they can't disturb you while you're playing the game. This means that most of the time, enemies are just incredibly annoying. Sure, they'll get a cheap jump out of you sometimes, but the proximity meter you're introduced to almost never works, and enemies will be on top of you before you even know they're close. Every time I've ran into one, it would be a bit shocking, and that's cool, but it also shouldn't be shocking just only because of the game mechanics that don't work. Each enemy also has a different reaction to you hiding. Some of them would just forget about you and go in a different direction, although a lot of the time they would double back, especially in a small room, and waiting for them to leave the room you're in often takes quite a while. One particular enemy actually just completely disappears after you hide. I don't know what the AI of this guy is like, but I actually never encountered him by walking into him. I would only get chased if I walked through one of the few level hazards, like a precarious glass bottle, and then the enemy would spawn right next to me. Once I'd exhausted all the ones in the level though, I never ran into him again, which meant that the whole level was completely empty and I had nothing to stop me from working out the puzzle. And the sad thing is that I kind of preferred it that way. These enemies are so frustrating to handle instead of being a fun survival horror obstacle. This was an extremely bad problem in one of the levels earlier on in the game. In the first level with an enemy and you're still getting used to the game, and for some reason it features the most egregious one of all. This thing can roam easier than any of the other enemies that are actually present in the level, because the space in this one earlier on is much smaller. There's only a few rooms, which means you are constantly being disturbed while you get adjusted to the types of puzzles in this game still. So on top of scratching my head for a while, which wasn't a problem on its own, but it became a problem when any time I wanted to try something, I always had to run back through this enemy, which would hit me any time I tried to interact with something. Obviously, you become more acquainted with the controls and quirks of doing puzzles without getting hit as you go, but before I was good at that, this enemy made me want to stop playing the game out of frustration for progression being so slow. It doesn't help that the AI of this one is a bit busted too, because eventually it just started camping one section of one of the rooms. So I literally could not go there without getting chased. I would try to peek in to see if the enemy was still there, and because the warning system doesn't work, I would never know if it had finally left, and if it hadn't, it would appear on me with no warning and kept chasing me into this hole where it couldn't reach me. It's important to realise that this problem only becomes half the size once you get familiar with how to progress through a level with minimal hindrance from the enemy, but it's an extremely grating process, and I would have had a lot more fun in the game earlier on had this encounter been less frustrating. Eventually you do adapt, which meant that I started enjoying the game more every level, but it's impossible to not point out that if you're looking for survival horror or horror with any engaging quirks, this is not it. And combine that with how the game was a slow burn in all other aspects as you familiarise yourself with this new style of gameplay, it's important to remember that it does get a lot more enjoyable, at least in my experience, although the encounter design is the one area of the game that does not grow on you at all. So the encounter design is the only real part of this game that I'd call bad. Everything else is either a good time or it becomes a good time once you get deeper into it. Just while we're on the topic of encounters and letdowns, I do need to quickly mention that there are boss fights in this game. There aren't many because attacking is not a thing you can do in the game aside from in these certain sections. I'm only going to cover them briefly because I don't want to rag on this game too much. The first boss is alright, it's novel, it's an okay time, fine. But the final boss, without spoiling anything, is really not that impressive aside from the visuals. It's an awkward end to the game because there are so many things that go wrong, but you can tell that the developers really tried something different compared to the rest of the game, and I don't think that we need to talk about it like it's a huge negative aspect of the game. It's there and it's not great, but it absolutely does not detract from the rest of the experience. Bye Sweet Carole does a lot of things you've never seen before, and I do believe it's worth experiencing all those things. The puzzle point and click adventure is engaging and honestly makes you use your brain quite hard. This is a real selling point of the game if you like these kind of puzzles. They're really fun, they can stump you in a good way, and it's a really great time trying to solve each level. The game is absolutely gorgeous too, so if you like the sound of these two things, then you really need to play it. The horror is great for the most part, aside from the mechanics of the encounters, and the story develops some great themes and characters, even if some of the fantasy areas of the story I found a little confusing. This is absolutely a game that I would recommend experiencing.